Father John here with this week's reflection, and this week's reflection is not on the appointed lessons for the Sunday because I didn't study them this week. I'm part of a clergy study group that works together to study the lessons and prepare to preach, but the group is mostly Lutherans, and among the Lutherans this Sunday is Reformation Day, and it's a very important observance for them. So those are the scriptures that we studied, but important as Reformation Day is to Lutherans and many other Protestants, it's not celebrated in the Episcopal Church, and I wonder why that would be. We are in many ways a Reformation church. Certainly the charter documents from that time 500 years ago, the time of Martin Luther and the other reformers and the Reformation that took place in the Church of England, certainly if you look at those charter documents and the theologians of the day, you would have to say that the Church of England was in many ways adopting and standing for the core principles of the Protestant Reformation. And that would be in particular the doctrine of justification by faith, that we are saved in our relationship to God solely through faith in God's grace, solely through trusting in the love of God, which comes to us as a gift through Jesus Christ, not in anything that we do to earn or deserve it, but solely as God's gift of grace and love, which we are invited to trust and then live in response to that grace and that love. And further, as a Reformation principle, that we can find that simply by reading the Bible. We don't need to have some church structure or authority tell us about what we should believe about that. We can find it in the scriptures alone. And if you look at the time of the Reformation in the Church of England, you will see without any doubt that this was the stand that was being taken in the Church of England. But what is it that makes it different, that would lead us as Episcopalians to not focus on Reformation Day as a day to celebrate liturgically? I would suggest that it's because of the fact that the English Reformation took quite a long time to unfold and to settle. We can kind of chart it over the course of four monarchs in the 16th century. First, King Henry VIII. That's when the break from Rome took place, but the outcome in the Church of England would be something we might call Catholicism without the Pope. But when Henry died and his son Edward succeeded him, then Edward's advisors pushed the Church of England more and more in a thoroughgoing Protestant reform direction. But then when Edward died and was succeeded by Queen Mary threw the whole thing into reverse and took the Church of England back to the Pope and to the previous Roman Catholic ways. But then when she died and was succeeded by Elizabeth I, having seen all of this conflict and controversy and one side fighting against the other, even executing the leaders of the other side, she wanted to have a more peaceful kingdom and to have the Church of England be a church that everyone could be a part of as much as possible, Protestants and Catholics. And so some of the earlier things from the time of Henry and Edward were revived and renewed and revised, but they were put in the context of the ongoing structural Catholic life of the church with bishops, priests, and deacons, and liturgy and sacraments. Now this, what is often called the Elizabethan settlement of a church that was meant to be open and inclusive of everyone who had been fighting, Catholics and Protestants, was then tested in the 17th century by civil war in England. And then after that, I think, is when we can say the English Reformation was completed, settled, and defined. And the outcome is a church, a way of being Christian, that maybe the best word to use to explain it is comprehensiveness, like Elizabeth intended. It's a way of being Christian, a way of being the church that seeks to be open as possible to everyone. Catholics, Protestants, and as time went on, we would have to say liberals and conservatives. And if you are an Anglican or an Episcopalian, you can put that package together in a way that is as unique to you, and you will find congregations that represent different ways of putting the package together. So one might be a liberal Catholic or a conservative Protestant, and a particular congregation might reflect one flavor or another of those things. Comprehensiveness. Now, it's frustrating to some because if someone has deep convictions and wants their church to be in a thoroughgoing, consistent way, either fully Catholic or fully Protestant or really liberal or really conservative, they will find our tradition, the Anglican and Episcopal tradition, to be somewhat frustrating. And they may not be able to settle in comfortably. But for the very same reasons, that comprehensiveness, for many people, provides the church home that their heart and their mind longs for. I also think this history is why the Anglican Communion and its churches, including the Episcopal Church, have been catalysts and leaders of the ecumenical movement over the last 100 years or so, the desire to bring churches into greater and eventually full unity. Michael Ramsey was the Archbishop of Canterbury from 1961 to 1974. And after he retired as Archbishop, he had a long and fruitful and active retirement, teaching and speaking and continuing to write books. He was a towering influence, not only in his physical stature, but in his influence on Christianity within our tradition and beyond. And he was a major influence on me as a young person and as a young priest. Here's a quote from his first book, which he wrote as a young man, a book called The Gospel in the Catholic Church, in which he describes his understanding of our Anglican and Episcopal tradition. This is Michael Ramsey. While the Anglican Church is vindicated by its place in history with a strikingly balanced witness to the gospel, to the church, and to sound learning, its greater vindication lies in pointing through its own history to something of which it is a fragment. Its credentials are its incompleteness, with a tension and travail in its soul. It is clumsy and untidy. It baffles neatness and logic. For it is sent not to commend itself as the best type of Christianity, but by its very brokenness to point to the universal church wherein all had died. Our tradition in the Anglican Communion and the Episcopal Church does not commend itself as the best type of Christianity, but it points beyond itself to something greater. That's exactly the home that my heart longs for, and where I do find myself most at home, as do others who are Episcopalians and Anglicans. And I remain convinced that it could also be a home for many others.